of a bitch.
Here's the thing about James Caan that nobody really talks about. He was extraordinary at playing men who had too much feeling and absolutely no idea what to do with it. Men who converted vulnerability into aggression, loneliness into swagger, fear into forward momentum. Men who were, if you look carefully, terrified, and who would rather burn everything down than let anyone see it. Sonny Corleone, the part that gave the actor his sole Academy Award nomination, is the most famous version of that character. And yes, Sonny is magnificent. The physicality, the rage, the dangerous charm that keeps you watching even when he's making yet another catastrophically brash decision. 5 minutes at a toll booth and the man is immortal. But Sonny also became a trap. Because once the public had that image locked in, the rest of Caan's career got filtered through it. The actor became the guy you cast when you needed someone who walks into a room already looking for trouble. The hothead, the tough guy, the human explosion on a short fuse. And this reading misses almost everything interesting about him. Because underneath that image is a career full of men who are losing. Men running on pride and never looking back, because stopping means sitting with what they actually feel. You can see that in how he listens in scenes, not just how he explodes. In the small moments where the performance cracks open and you see someone much more scared than the surface suggests. And the range of films that followed The Godfather certainly supports this idea. 1975's Rollerball casts him as the most physically dominant man in a brutal futuristic sport, but the whole film is really about whether that man is allowed to have an inner life. Funny Lady, released the same year, puts him opposite Barbra Streisand as Billy Rose, the brash, insecure showbiz operator who wants to be taken seriously and never quite is. And then there's 1979's Chapter 2, a Neil Simon adaptation where Caan plays a recently widowed writer trying to fall in love again while still drowning in grief. A tender, raw, and almost entirely forgotten performance. These 3 films, belonging to 3 different genres, are just a few examples of a filmography that asks the same underlying question. What does a man do with the feelings he cannot show? That was the chip on Caan's shoulder throughout his career. One that's filled with titles that extend far beyond what he showed in Mario Puzo's adaptation. And so, to give them the attention they deserve, here are my top 5 picks for James Caan's most underrated movies listed in chronological order. But before we get started, here are a few honorable mentions. Cinderella Liberty. This is a title worth finding if you want to see Caan genuinely playing a soft guy. His character is a sailor, which sounds like a setup for machismo, but the film is really a tender, slightly melancholic love story, and the actor is gentle and uncertain throughout in ways that would probably surprise people who only know his most famous character. Comes A Horseman. This is a serious, unhurried modern western from Alan J. Pakula. Caan holds his own opposite Jane Fonda and Jason Roberts in a film that relies on its characters more than its plot. A slow, beautiful, and kind of adult film studio drama we pretend Hollywood still makes. Alien Nation. Now this is a movie that has no right to work as well as it does. The sci-fi buddy cop premise, social allegory and genre clothing, and Caan playing a cynical human who's half of an unlikely partnership. He keeps the movie grounded when it could easily go ridiculous, which, when you think about it, it's kind of a skill. And one to avoid, 1975's The Killer Elite. On paper, Sam Peckinpah directing James Caan opposite Robert Duvall sounds like one of the great films of the decade, but it turns out to be one of the more spectacular cases of great ingredients producing something you cannot recommend to anyone. Really disappointing and a hard pass. And now on to the ranking. At number 5 we have The Rain People. When this title was released in 1969, Francis Ford Coppola was still working out what kind of director he was going to be. The film follows Natalie, a pregnant housewife who abruptly leaves her marriage and drives across America, trying to understand whether her life has already been decided for her without her input. Along the way, she picks up Jimmy, a former college football whose head injury has left him permanently childlike. Their connection is tender, uncomfortable, and with no easy way out. This movie finds Coppola working at a completely different scale, smaller, looser, more searching. A road movie that feels like it was made by someone genuinely unsure where it was going, which turns out to be the exactly right approach for a story about people who are also truly unsure where they're heading. The America the film drives through looks wide open and feels completely airless. Motels, diners, empty fields, freedom with nowhere to go. The film was never going to be a hit. Natalie does not find her answer. Jimmy does not get saved. Nobody walks away fixed. By 1969 standards, that felt like a film that had given up. But over 50 years later, it feels like a film that was telling the truth. Shirley Knight is extraordinary as Natalie. She plays her as a person trying to breathe, who keeps hurting people whilst looking for air. That kind of performance, sympathetic and difficult simultaneously, is very hard to pull off, and she does it completely. Caan, despite his short frame, plays the physical contradiction absolutely straight. Jimmy is built like a protector, large, strong, capable of real menace if he wanted it. And he's emotionally exposed to every shift in temperature, every suggestion that he might not be wanted, every unkind word. His voice softens, the body folds. The charm is real, but it has nowhere safe to land. The actor gives the character his own dignity, logic, and real needs. And because he plays it that way, the film's emotional damage lands properly, rather than just generating pity. What The Rain People proves, before any of the famous films in the actor's career, is that the sensitivity was already there. 2 years later, Brian's song would make that quality famous and make half the world cry. Here, it is just quietly arriving, with virtually nobody watching. After this title, Caan would become one of the most recognizable faces in American cinema, and the next thing he did with that recognition is really funny. At number 4 on this list, we have Freebie and the Bean. In this Richard Rush title, we meet two San Francisco detectives who are trying to keep a crime boss alive long enough to arrest him, whilst the hitman is simultaneously working the opposite angle. That's the plot. Calling this title plot-driven is like calling a demolition derby a traffic management solution. Now, some of the aspects on this movie have not aged well, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. A disclaimer I make only for the more sensitive viewers. The politics of the movie are occasionally dodgy, and the characters behave less like public servants and more like two ongoing lawsuits that happen to carry badges. But as a snapshot of what buddy cop cinema looked like before the formula became the template that guided the likes of Lethal Weapon and 48 Hours, it is truly fascinating. The car chases are the practical, expensive, dangerous kind. Vehicles do not slide elegantly. They crunch and flip and die convincingly. They almost feel like they belong in a John Landis movie. The director keeps the whole thing at a screwball pace that makes it part cop film, part farce, part civic disaster, and that's exactly what the movie needed to be. There's this sequence where the two leads are supposed to be conducting surveillance and somehow end up causing more damage than the criminals they're watching. Rush shoots it like a Buster Keaton sketch with a body count. Like most of the elements in the movie, this too shouldn't work, but guess what? It truly does. Still, the main reason to watch Freebie and the Bean is Caan's Tim Freebie Walker, opposite Alan Arkin's Dan Bean Delgado. Arkin brings verbal agitation and perpetual grievance. Caan brings physical confidence and an almost serene capacity for chaos. Together, they feel like two people trapped in a marriage that neither will admit they chose. The bickering works because deep down these two need each other. What the actor is doing specifically is playing the macho image for comedy without losing his star presence. Caan's Freebie is both effortlessly cool and a total idiot in motion, and more often than not, at the same time. The actor holds these two things in the same frame without breaking a sweat. Now that takes real skill. Actors who try it and fail just come across as self-deprecating, and that's a completely different quality. The choice to make this film at all is part of the argument. By 1974, the actor was deemed an A-lister. Most performers at that level spend their credibility immediately on something that announces they should have been taken even more seriously. Caan spent it on a film where he drives a car through a wall and bickers with Alan Arkin. That is either very confident or very self-aware. In my opinion, in Caan's specific case, this is probably both. And from self-awareness in the comic mode to something considerably darker, the next entry is where the recklessness stops being funny and starts being a vocation. At number 3, The Gambler. Also from 1974, but from a completely different emotional planet, The Gambler stars Caan as Axel Fried, a New York literature professor with a gambling addiction that is quietly tearing his life apart. Outwardly, he's articulate, respected, and capable of a very convincing impression of a person who has things under control. Privately, he is borrowing money from family, antagonizing dangerous people, and treating risk the way most people treat coffee. Something he needs to function, something that has stopped working the way it used to, and also something he cannot stop reaching for. The film was overlooked at the time and has never quite found the conversation it deserves. It refuses every genre you might reach for. What it is a portrait of a man who understands his own destruction completely and finds the understanding useless. Carol Reyes directs without sentiment. There is absolutely no moment where the film pauses to explain Axel, or even tries to invite your sympathy. The title moves from faculty rooms to basketball courts to bookies' backrooms and family apartments. But the common denominator is Axel, who contaminates all of them. The respectable world and the criminal world are closer than anyone wants to admit. The supporting cast, consisting of Paul Sorvino, Burt Young, and Lauren Hutton, orbit Axel with varying degrees of patience and alarm, but none of them can reach him. Still, make no mistake, this is Caan's film entirely. What he understands about Axel is that gambling is really about the sensation of being fully alive in a way that nothing legitimate provides. That's the real source of the addiction. Watch the moment where Axel sits down at a poker table. The classroom, the family, the obligations, all of it falls away. His eyes sharpen, and Caan makes the casino feel like the real life, and everything else feel like background or distraction. And the terrible thing about this performance is that you can feel it. The electricity in the rooms where he plays. The specific quality of his attention when the cards are out. By the end of the decade, and after a string of iconic performances, the actor was famous enough to do essentially whatever he wanted. And what he wanted was to direct a movie based on a true story about a working-class father whose children had been taken from him by the machinery of government bureaucracy. That's essentially the plot of the number 2 movie on this list, Hide in Plain Sight. The movie stars Caan as Thomas Hacklin, a factory worker whose wife enters the witness protection program with her new partner and whose children disappear with her into a system designed to be unfindable. When Hacklin tries to locate them, the response from authorities is merely procedural. Forms and policies and the very reasonable explanations of people who cannot help him. That is what makes the film quietly devastating. The real horror present in this story is the fact that the system is indifferent in a way that produces the same outcome as evil, and nobody's technically at fault. Caan directs with real patience. He does not try to juice the scenes for outrage. The blue-collar details are specific and lived in. Factory floors, modest apartments, the kind of neighborhood where people know each other in ways that rarely help when it matters. Danny Aiello and Jill Eikenberry in the supporting cast both feel like actual people rather than genre-stock characters. Watch the scene where Hacklin sits across from Aiello's character, a lawyer, and lays out exactly what has happened to his children. Aiello's Sal Carvello listens. He understands. And then he explains, very patiently, and with a scary finality tone in his voice, why there's nothing to be done. Hacklin absorbs it without flinching. No explosion. Just a man deciding in real time that this is not over yet. As an actor, Caan keeps the character's anger on a very slow burn. There is no cathartic explosion. The whole performance is clenched patience, wounded pride, and exhausted determination. When you think about the actor's range, that quality, stubborn, grinding, holding on without fanfare, is something most people never associate with him. Still, this showcase is some of the best work he ever did. The directorial choice itself says something. James Caan used his debut behind the camera to tell a story about an ordinary man being grounded down by institutions, about fatherhood as a form of persistent, unglamorous love. That is a more revealing choice than anything he could have said in an interview. And then, 1 year later, came the film where everything locked into place. Topping this list is Michael Mann's debut feature from 1981, Thief. Still the most complete version of James Caan on screen, and still the film that contains everything he was good at and gives it all room to breathe. In the title, Caan plays Frank, a master safecracker who has built a precise, self-sufficient life around his work and is trying to exit it. He's extraordinary at what he does. He also has a very specific idea of what a normal life looks like, and he has assembled the components of it with the same heart and discipline he brings to a vault door. Wife, children, house, stability, but not necessarily in that order. To accelerate his retirement plan, he agrees to one last job, a heist that involves a collaboration with a powerful crime figure. And because this is Michael Mann, professional discipline and personal longing begin destroying each other almost immediately. The film works as a crime procedural because it treats the work as actual work. The tools, the planning, the long patient drilling, the waiting. The opening scene alone, watching Frank take apart a safe with total concentration, is more gripping than most conventional action scenes, because the skill is real, and so is the patience, and you can feel what it costs. One of the movie's highlights is the soundtrack. Tangerine Dream's score is doing something unusual underneath all of the action. It's cold and romantic at the same time, mechanical, but somehow aching, like someone taught a synthesizer what it feels to want something you cannot have. The background, Chicago, looks exactly right. Rain slick, neon lit, all steel surfaces and burning light. The city is the emotional weather of the film. And then there is Caan. The performance holds toughness and longing in the same frame without either one canceling the other out. The character is controlled, precise, and professional. He has built himself out of rules, because operating on feelings without them is too dangerous for a man who has spent 15 years in prison learning that feelings get you killed. And then there's that iconic diner scene with Tuesday Weld, where Caan opens the character up in a way that has no precedent in the rest of the film. Frank just lays his history out like inventory. What he had, what it cost, what he wants. The scene does not announce itself. Caan plays it with no performance within the performance. The vulnerability is just suddenly there, unprotected, in the open. The scene would also tell you everything you need to know about Mann and lays out the blueprint for an execution form he would later revisit in the likes of Miami Vice, The Insider, Collateral, and most obviously Heat. That is the quality that runs through every film. Atmospheric backgrounds that lay out a playing field where emotions come alive. And speaking of emotions, that is the quality that runs through every film on this list. The common denominator across all these 5 titles is that they all contain men who are harder on the outside than the inside, and who occasionally, accidentally, let you see the gap. The actor understood that gap better than almost any of his peers. He just spent a lot of time of his career being cast for the outside. Michael Mann's Thief gets to use both. And there you have it, 5 films that prove the hothead was always the least interesting thing about James Caan. The damaged innocent, the comic bruiser who knew exactly what he looked like, the elegant self-saboteur, the grieving father who made a personal film when nobody was asking for one, and the criminal craftsman who finally got a role big enough to hold everything at once. Sonny Corleone made James Caan immortal, but immortality is a snapshot. These 5 films are everything that was happening underneath it, the feeling he spent his whole career trying to keep under control. And if The Godfather is all you know, then you're missing the whole story.